Hello, we are the Dirty Birds, and I'm Evelyn, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Rachel. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Ian. I use he, him pronouns.
And I'm Antonia, and I use she, her pronouns. Today we'll be discussing the film The Artist is Present in light of the essay The Mirror Stage by Jacques Lacan, and we will be analyzing concrete details from the film.
Yay. Okay, so before we start kind of going into the film and the different details that we're going to be discussing, we're just going to briefly talk about the mirror stage and what exactly it is and how Lacan describes it. So just to start off, the mirror stage happens when a child, a human child, and it happens to everybody, is within 6 to 18 months old. And so essentially the theory of the mirror stage is basically that a child is held up to a mirror and sees its reflection and can recognize that its reflection is itself for the first time in its life. And this essentially leads to the child then realizing that the reflection is a whole being. And it then in turn realizes that itself and the world around it is actually not whole, which in turn leads to feelings of lack, which we will expand upon. So yeah, that's just a basic. Who is
I'm sorry.
Ian, are you next or is Rachel next?
Me?
I think it's you. Yeah. What implications?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No,
So when
okay.
talking about the implications, it's important to talk about how we enter desire and how we trade our sense of being for sense itself. And we start to recognize things, we learn to communicate. And like from that stage onward, we operate for the rest of our lives on this system of lack, of feeling that we're empty and a little bit incomplete and that there's something missing from our lives. And kind of in that sense, lack and the idea of desire go hand in hand, feeling that we're incomplete and then searching after things that make us feel complete. And the differentiation we experience, it allows us to break the world up into parts and make sense of ourselves as separate from the world that we do break into parts. And it's important to understand these things because it is inescapable. No one is immune to the mirror stage. And even if you're in a place where you're not able to have like the actual metaphoric sense of a mirror stage of looking at yourself in a mirror, there's always presents like an opportunity to see yourself as separate from the world. So no one is exempt, and it's important to talk about this and recognize it because that's the only thing you can do in order to further your understanding of it and educate yourself so that you're not completely in the dark about how you're affected by it and how you operate on a sense of lack and desire.
So relating this to screen media in general, we have sort of talked throughout the semester about finding some sort of like identification with films that we're watching or media in general, or feeling separation from them. And so this idea of the mirror stage has kind of put a different perspective on that, and finding something in media or seeing a lack of something in media or a lack within yourself when you are experiencing media. And specifically with performance art in relation to the film that we watched this week, you're sort of seeing this media experience, but it's in person, it's something you're interacting with, which I think Antonia is going to get a little bit more into as well.
Yeah, so to expand on that, in the specific performance that was in the MoMA exhibit, where Marina sits in the chair for 3 consecutive months, and she she mentions that the world is moving so fast, and this is a way that she brings the audience in and she allows them to slow down, and she asks them to kind of stop and transforms the audience. And the audience becomes her lover in this moment where she's doing the gaze throughout the performance. And she also, the performers that are in the exhibit, the 30 performers, she does a process with them where she brings them to her house, and she prepares them for this really intense performance that they're going to have to endure. And really, she says that it is a time to empty themselves and bring them back to zero gravity. And so, because when they are doing the performance, they have to be present and in some ways their wholeness and bring down, which is kind of relates back to the mirror stage a little bit. And yeah.
Yeah, I feel like kind of expanding upon that, like what just to get a little bit more into what we're going to be talking about. I think that what you were talking about regarding presence, like in the present moment, which is what a lot of her performance art like has to do with, is grounding people and keeping them in the present. I think that that is almost like a counter to the mirror stage in a lot of ways. Like it relates and it counters, because I think the mirror stage is a lot about, like, since you are constantly feeling this like lacking feeling or like desire for things that you do not have, I think that it is kind of forcing you to always be looking like to the future, to the past, and like what you are and what you wish you could be, rather than just like, this is the current moment, this is who I am, and like embracing that fully. So I think that a lot of her art, especially like the kind of like main, I guess, piece or like presentation that she was doing in the MoMA of her, like you were saying, like in the artist is present, like just sitting there. I think that that brings people into this like emotional moment where, like, for maybe the first time in some people's lives, they're just sitting with themselves and with her, looking at each other, being there in the present moment, not necessarily thinking about ways in which they lack or thinking about desires which they feel. So I think that in a lot of ways, it's kind of like almost countering the feelings of the mirror stage, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys have thoughts about that, but that's what I was kind of thinking.
I thought the timing of it was really interesting too, because like when you're talking about that idea of being present in the moment and just like having to sit there, the fact that it was like 15 minutes or something, like a lot of them were just like you have to sit long enough to where it almost makes you uncomfortable, or does in a lot of cases make you uncomfortable. I think that also kind of counters the perception I got of like those initial moments of like the mirror stage, like making those like drastic quick movements and seeing them mirrored, and you're like then very aware that like those movements are something that you're doing that is like coming back at you because this figure is like a reflection of you. I thought that like the quickness of that was interesting when you think about the like length that you have to sit and just sort of do the opposite and like see yourself in this person who's sitting in front of you for long enough that you're like really going through some sort of emotional like journey in your perception of them and yourself.
Yeah. I think I don't disagree with you, Evelyn, in reference to like what you said before, Rachel, but I kind of just read like the performance piece in a different way. Like I think Marina at one point she says, "I am a mirror of their own self," and it's like, to me, I read like this staring face to face as kind of like a second recognition that they're separate from the world, because like the first one comes when you're a baby, when you're a child, like you gain the self-awareness, but like to me when she's like, I'm a mirror that's like reflecting who they are and their pain and like what they lack, like at that point a lot of the people who were like staring face to face with her, some of the people who probably like were feeling the greatest amounts of pain, were people who have lived like full lives and like have experienced lack, have experienced desire. So it's like they're recognizing that these are emotions that they feel for like a second time. That's kind of how I saw it. Like it's realizing again that there's a certain emptiness that can't be filled. And like whenever someone like started crying from like staring face to face with her, that's kind of how I read it, like a second mirror stage per se.
I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. And kind of like going off of that, like that is making me think, because I think that my original interpretation of the mirror stage was very much like all about the lack and the desire and the looking to the future, looking to the past kind of thing. But in a way, I think that you could kind of say the original mirror stage that somebody goes through, like in that moment. I mean, obviously in the first moments, like you're a baby, so I don't really know if the baby has the full capacity to be like thinking these thoughts, but just like generally speaking, like the the metaphor of the mirror stage, like I think that originally I guess it almost is kind of like a grounding moment in the present rather than a like looking forward, looking back, not being in the present moment. I think that it's more so the implications of the mirror stage cause you to not feel whole in the moment, if that makes sense. But like within the actual like mirror stage, like present living in it, it's more of a grounding feeling of like I'm separate from everything, but like I am my own thing, kind of. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I'm just kind of like going between those like not definitions, but like interpretations of it, I guess. But I feel like what you're saying, Ian, makes a lot of sense. And I like agree, I think. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I was gonna talk about her relationship with the main Uli. Is that what we decided on, Uli?
Ule, I think.
Ule,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And I feel like what I was gonna talk about sort of goes into that a little bit. I was thinking about how if there's this desire and lack in their relationship because they both are such seemingly like fully formed artists and humans that have sort of developed a strong sense of self, it's almost like whatever they are still lacking could be potentially like found in this other person. And I think that that's why that together they like made such strong work. And yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying, Evelyn, and just having this like this absence or whatever going on at the same time as, I don't know how to quite put that part of it, but yeah, I'm gonna come back to that. But basically their relationship I was thinking about as both flies in my room, something that is whole in itself because they're filling in these other parts of each other, but also at the same time like constantly underscored by this lack and this absence that can't really be filled in because they were so similar. And so their relationship was such as like both life and art and work kind of thing. Like there's always going to be something underlying that was missing, which I think sort of doomed it while also making it like that sort of soulmate kind of connection or whatever. Yeah, no real conclusions there, but that's something that I was thinking about.
Yeah. I feel like you touched base on like a lot of things that are in Lacan's essay and also like that we talked about in class. And like in regards to their separation, I'm going to talk about that as well. So Ule talks about how they had like a simplistic life. Like they kind of had a routine where she would stay at home and cook and clean and do like the motherly things while he like did the work, the bank stuff, whatever. But after that life, like that life that they lived together for a long time, that's when she started becoming like more ambitious with her work and like began to fill her life with performance rather than doing the things that they did while they were together. So like I feel like that kind of ties into like the desire and lack that you were talking about. So they were like with each other for a long time, and like of course like there has to be some like sense of fulfillment that they both felt from that, because like for a while they were content living this simplistic life, but once they like separated there was like the creation of lack. And even just the fact that like they separated, like there's like a creation of lack there, or like at some point they began to realize that like the relationship that they had was lacking something. And that kind of ties into this idea that we talked about in class, how like a lot of the time it's about the chase, and once you like obtain this thing that you think will like make you whole and feel like that emptiness that you have, it's not as satisfying as you once thought it would be. So like there's the creation of lack in the relationship which led to the end of it, but then like post relationship there's also like a creation of lack because like this thing that like brought you a lot of fulfillment is no longer part of your life, which creates like a desire for work and ambition, which like to me like it kind of like launched Marina into like the next phase of her work because like she realized that there was like a lot lacking. Then the last thing I'll say is, I have this written in my notes. The mirror phase metaphorically represents the way humans exist out of sync with their own reality. And then in quote, symbolizes the eye's mental permanence at the same time as it prefigures its alienating destination. We feel ourselves to be complete and one thing, but we are not. We lack. So like just with that in mind, it kind of makes me think about, in reference to Marina, like just as like yourself, or maybe not even just Marina, but just as yourself, like the only thing that is permanent in your mind is like who you are and your consciousness. And like there has to be like some sort of out of syncness with like the world around you, especially like other human beings, because you're not able to like perceive their consciousness and perceive their own permanence of like their, because they everyone has a sense of their own permanence of their own conscious, but you can't experience other people's, you can only experience your own. And like I think that's really powerful because like then you're just lacking all the time because it's like truly an alienating feeling. So like while you can chase things that like you think bring you fulfillment, like Marina and Ule's relationship, there is always going to be lack because the only thing that is permanent is your own like consciousness and your own I. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was really fascinated about like Marina and her like side of the relationship, I guess. And this was said towards the end of the movie, and I think it was her like the guy with the German guy, I think, I don't know, he had an accent. He said they were divorced, so I think they were married at one point. But he said, what you're saying is this giant canvas also projections connection to audience, this lack that she felt as a child. She desires feeling loved and desired and wanted. She needs the audience like she needs air. She lives for art. And that's like a rough quotation, but I found that like really interesting in the fact that like she was never going to be satisfied with the life that her and Ule had because she has this like dysfunction, like perception of love because she never was loved as a child. And so I think that's why whenever they say time and time that like every time someone sits in front of her, they like fall in love with her and that she's in love, but really like that she's in love with the world. And I found that like she's always seeking this thing that is never gonna be, it's never gonna be like whole for her. So yeah.
I could see that being like both something that would be really difficult throughout life and something that she wouldn't necessarily want to reconcile is like that like work-life separation of having the spiritual side of like her grandmother, somebody she was talking about, and then like the strict side of her parents, and then like the art side being also her like fully her relationship and her like desire for love and everything. It seems like something that there were a lot of dichotomies that seemed very much meshed in her life in the film that I think were mirrored in her relationship and how it ended up playing out.
I also feel like what you were saying, Antonia, about like her experiences and everything could almost in a way kind of just be like just the general like human experience in like varying degrees. Because I think she was almost like an intense version of like what it means to be human, kind of. That sounds strange, but just like the fact that she is feeling these constant desires and these lacks like in a really intense way, but at the same time like what we can kind of gather from the mirror stage is just the fact that everybody constantly is feeling desire for something. And I think a lot of the time it's almost something that you can't necessarily like quite place, but just like these desires for these feelings that like you think are possible to feel either for another person or within yourself, but are like just out of reach. And I also kind of wanted to segue a little bit into something else I was thinking about, since we've been talking about like lack and desire, obviously, because those are huge themes. I was thinking particularly about one of the performance pieces she did where she had like that table full of items and let people walk up to her and kind of like do whatever they wanted like to her body. Like she had like markers and like they only talked about it briefly, but I've heard of it before. So I thought that that was like particularly really interesting to me. And something I was thinking about when she was having all these people like draw all over her and like do things to her. I don't even know what was happening, like what different types of things were done to her, probably not all great things. Um, and I was thinking about how I feel like that kind of ties into, we were talking a little bit in class about jealousy. I like had asked a question about it, particularly like in class, because that's kind of like interesting to me, like just the concept of it in general. And I was wondering what you guys think about this, because I was thinking that that particular piece of performance work is kind of representative of how people may desire, like a desire that people may have is for other people to feel lack or to feel lacking, like as they do. And that was almost like a real life, like in the flesh, like representation of that, because it's like people coming up to this person who they might think like is beautiful or like looks perfect and great, and it's just like standing there and kind of like, I don't know the word, but I guess like I want to say defiling, but I don't know if that's like the right word at all, or if I'm using just a completely incorrect word for that. But basically like going up to her and like kind of destroying her in a sense is almost like representative of like jealousy or like the desire to for others to feel lack. So that like their lack can match what they're feeling on the inside, kind of. I don't know if that's like too deep and weird, but that's something that I was thinking about, because that particular piece that she did like really interested me and like made me think. So yeah.
This is in reference to like both what you said and what Antonia said earlier. So I have that the quote that Antonia you talked about. Her connection to the audience comes out of extraordinary lack that she felt as a child. So like it's what kind of like what we talked about is like trading being for sense. So like trading your sense of wholeness for sense itself. Recognizing objects as objects and like the need to communicate. So like when she's with sorry, when she's with like this audience staring face to face with them, it's like a form of communication in a way. So like she's kind of trading that sense of wholeness for like recognition and communication of lack in a way. And then in reference to like the performance piece that Evelyn that you're talking about, I feel like it works both ways. Like for one, I kind of perceive it as like Marina kind of challenging like, oh, do these people have something that I don't have? And if they do have something that I lack, let's see if they can give it to me. Like, let's see if they can come up to my body, put it on me, like defile me in a way, and maybe I'll gain something from that that I'm missing. But it also works like in the sense that you were talking about, where like it's kind of like an act of jealousy, where like on the audience's side, it's like this person doing this performance piece, like why are they doing this? Do they have something that I don't have? Do they have something that I lack? And if they do have something that I lack, that makes me upset, and I'm gonna defile it. I'm gonna mark up this body because I don't like that I am not able to maybe communicate like this, like trading being for sense. Like maybe they don't feel whole, and like their way of communicating that is like defiling her. So I do think it works both ways, but I don't know what other people think.
I cannot personally place what you're talking about. Like I can picture it obviously and understand all the implications and everything, but was it presented as like, and from what you knew about it before, like inherently destructive, or was it like sort of you're just presented with this person and these things, no connotations previously like given to you, and you're just supposed to sort of go with it? Like how did people sort of respond similarly, or was it like do you know about just the leading up and then like how people kind of went with it?
To my knowledge, it was like essentially a table full of different materials, some of which were like markers and like things that you could use to like destroy in a sense. But it wasn't like people were necessarily told like go up to her body and like destroy what she looks like. And I mean, there was also like a gun on the table and like a knife, I'm pretty sure. Like there were like weapons. And from what this could be very incorrect. So like definitely take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. But I think that I heard like on the internet, so again, grain of salt, but that some people like assaulted her like when she was doing this piece because she was just standing there like without moving. I don't know if she was clothed or not, to be honest. I don't remember, but I heard that people went up to her and like were touching her inappropriately. So I think that it wasn't necessarily like go up to her and destroy her and hurt her, but it was like people took it upon themselves to do so with the materials they were presented with. So it was also kind of like almost like not commentary, but something along those lines of like human nature and like what are humans going to do if they're presented with these items and with a vulnerable person that like isn't going to like fight back, I guess. So I don't know if that helps you at all, but yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it's very interesting. Not yeah.
No, yeah, and also
I
Ian,
feel like
oh sorry, you can go first. I was just talking, so.
just like something like what you said particularly like made me think of like the sense of wholeness. Like if you're being presented with like not necessarily a willing subject, but like someone who is communicating that they're not gonna fight back against like what you would like to do, in a sense that makes me think of like being able to express like your desire and your own lack in like its truest form, because like you're not having any like pushback and you're like imposing that desire and that lack on like someone else. And there's like kind of the hostility of desire that we talked about a little in class that we talked, yeah, there's a hostility in that. Like I definitely do think lack and desire can get hostile and aggressive, and that's an example of that.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say when you were about to finish up, like that made me think, like, I don't know if you guys, like, do you think that feelings of like aggression and anger are like a direct result like of the mirror stage, or is that kind of like built upon? Because I feel like you could kind of say that the feelings of lack could segue into either feelings of like depression and like self pity, I guess, or like isolation, but could also segue into like anger and like resentment towards other people. This is not a complete thought. This is just something that I was thinking on along the lines of what you were saying. So I feel like there's, I guess I kind of answered my own question in a sense. Like I don't know if you guys agree, but there could kind of be like a divide in like what results from the original feelings of the mirror stage of like the lack and the desire and everything. So it's just a thought. Yeah.
I had in my notes from the reading something about like situating self-image like early enough on in life that it's undisturbed by social factors. That's like what I had written down. And I feel like that was something that I was grappling with, was like how much of it is like determined by social factors and how much of it is just like a natural human process of like letting yourself develop through identification. And I don't know. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, like it could end up in different places.
Yeah, that makes me think about like just the extremity of like a lot of her performance pieces, like the one where the two people like run into each other was pretty violent, and then the one where she carves the pentagram into her own stomach. Like those are extreme examples of like what I'm beginning to understand now is like not trying to like fill lack necessarily, but like just the desire to like express. Like to me, like a lot of her performance pieces are about communicating just like the sense and like, you know, like because we talked about how we trade our sense of wholeness for sense itself. Like to me, her performance is a lot about communicating that sense that we feel, like recognizing things as separate, recognizing ourselves as incomplete. And then Rachel just kind of goes into what you were saying. In the film, Marina, she kind of talks about how she's been doing this for many years, but it wasn't until she got really old that people started like recognizing what she was doing as art, and they stopped asking her like, why is this art? And they started just like recognizing like it for what it was, like art, what have you. If you think it's not art, I don't know. But it's kind of like what Rachel was saying, how much of like these lacks and desires you express are like influenced by like the social circumstance that you're in. So like I don't know, like people have this perception of like her as a young artist as probably like naive and like writing off her work as not art, but then like as she gets older, like do the social circumstances change? to where like they recognize like her life lived as like one filled with desire and lack as well. I don't know, a lot of ideas, a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of building off that, but definitely not answering your question because I honestly don't really know either. But I was just thinking when you were talking about like uh the particular piece, I never know if I should call them like art pieces or I guess they're performances. So like the particular performance where they were like running into each other, just about how like that also could be representative of like the like channeling kind of like these inner turmoils and inner emotions that kind of everybody feels of like the anger towards this feeling of lack and desire kind of. I'm trying to make sense of this as I say it. So like um but just like I feel like kind of everybody in a way maybe subconsciously also like feels some sort of like anger towards the fact that like we never really feel like whole, if that makes sense. And like these kind of like representations of like this, because to me it feels angry. I could be interpreting it not incorrectly but differently from like how you guys think about it. Like I'm curious to see like what you would think of that. But to me it feels kind of like anger or like a resentment, like this kind of like knocking together, which I feel like can kind of be representative of these like inner feelings that people feel regarding these bigger themes that we've been talking about. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has anything else to say about that.
Yeah, like the performance when they were just her and Ule were like sitting across from each other and just slapping each other like back and forth, and how that was like the female, and that's it's the female male dynamic at its like very base form. And to me that was a very angry portrayal of a feeling of lack and like, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like that actually is a really good point because it's also kind of like lack both ways. Like it's like you're saying like it's the at the core like representation of like female and male like relationship and like any type of relationship, and how like I feel like that lack is felt in both ways for like certain things and like desire to be able to do or feel certain ways that the other sex you may feel is able to feel or do easier or harder, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's like an interesting point. I wasn't even thinking about that.
Two things. One, I feel like a lot of the performances with her and Ule, like it's representative of like that idea that we talked about where like if you meet someone who's too much like you, your like immediate response is aggression. And like in the film, both her and Ule, they kind of talked about how like there was a recognition of like this desire to create art, and like they were very similar to each other. And I feel like that similarness or that likeness that they recognized in one another, it could have like definitely resulted in like that aggression. um because like it's evident in like the pieces that they do, like they crash into each other, they're slapping each other. He's pulling the bow back like ready to shoot her, and they're just standing there at like the angle, which was really scary by the way. But like they're just like each other, and they're like kind of response to that is like aggression, like that is depicting lack in a way. And then the other thing that I had to say is like just talking about their performances, particularly like I'm so sorry that I'm coughing, human, and um particularly like their performances together. Like she talked about how he was not happy, and like their performances were doing better. Like the better their performances did, the more unhappy and like the worse their private relationships became. So like there's like an emptiness there as well, where like they're creating like this art form, and like people are witnessing it, and like it's kind of like a representation of lack, but it's not like amounting to anything in the sense that like it's making the like, what is it, source material, like the relationship itself, it's deteriorating. So like that kind of says something to me about like her work as a whole. Like is it really representative of like the life she's living and like the lack and desire she's feeling, or maybe it is completely representative of that, because like people are responding well to like these representations of desire and lack that she's like expressing, and maybe like their unhappiness in their relationship translated well to these feelings of lack and desire in their performance. Okay, I changed my own mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to throw a dagger in the conversation, but I do just want to say that like we have like a couple minutes left, like just to make sure that we're like at a solid time. So if anybody has any like final comments or things they want to say, this is a good time to do so.
I have one more thing that probably won't like start up a whole nother conversation, but that I just thought was interesting. The like performance or performer versus actor thing that they were talking about. And like, well, okay, I had one quote that said, when you perform, you have a knife and it's your blood. When you're acting, it's ketchup and you don't cut yourself. That was like the other ex or like person that was running the show or whatever. I thought it was the fact that she's a performer and she's surrounding herself with these performers, and it's something that is so like inherent to her being. It was really interesting then to see that like small kind of view into her as an actor, and like her ability to separate it, and sort of those other performances she was doing after the end of the relationship, I think, but it was when it was. I just thought that was interesting in terms of what you're sacrificing almost, and kind of what lack is present as somebody who's acting, and then a lack that is present when you're just like performing and putting on a different kind of show.
Yeah, I think like so many of her performances, and just like what I'm understanding now is like it's a lot about self-sacrifice and like how far you are willing to go in order to like be able to express these feelings that you feel and like this lack that you experience. And like that's kind of not something that has an answer, because like it sounds dramatic, but she's like a dramatic performer. Like she definitely like could have gone farther in a sense. Like she could have like hurt herself. I don't want her to, but like that's like another way to express like, and it's clear that like she might have been willing to do that, just like in reference to like of her other performances. But yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions that I have about lack, but I'm learning through these videos that those unanswered questions are okay.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that's like almost the ending to like so many of our videos. It's just like we have lots of questions and who knows if we'll get the answers that we need. But I feel like that kind of is like what we always kind of we conclude with, because it's like we can talk through it a lot, but I feel like talking through it answers questions and also just like brings up more and more questions. It's like I agree. And I feel like also all of her performance art is like so like it's all up for interpretation. And I feel like with all art, like you get to kind of decide like what it means. So it's hard to like kind of like pinpoint like this is exactly what she's trying to say with this particular piece. Cause like you could say that to her and it could be like completely not what she was thinking, but it could still make sense to us. So I feel like that's life. You just never really know. And I feel like that's a great place to end. And I just want to say, rip Ule. He lived a great life. This video is dedicated to him. Shout out Ule. You did a great job with your life. And yeah,
Yes,
I
he
feel
did.
like that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for watching.
And screen like Ule, the dates of his birth and death.
Oh yeah, in like script. That'd be
Yeah.
nice. Okay, thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.